My parents banned my son from Christmas, so I cut them off. So, my name's Madison, and I'm 34. I lost my husband Liam 7 months ago. A stupid accident at the construction site he was supervising. A scaffolding failure. One of those things you hear about on the news, but never expect to become your reality. He died instantly. No time for goodbyes. 1 second I was texting him about dinner. The next his foreman was at our door, hat in hand, face pale, eyes hollow. I remember how the air left the room. I collapsed before I even understood what the man was saying. Our son, Eli, is 7. He's this wide-eyed, endlessly curious little boy with a mop of brown curls and this laugh that comes from somewhere deep. After the funeral, he asked if Daddy was sleeping. I didn't know what to say. I still don't. I just held him for hours, both of us crying on the living room floor. I thought grief would bring my family closer. At least that's what I hoped. But it turned out, support didn't come from the people I expected. Liam's parents, Carol and Frank, stepped in right away. Carol was at our house the next morning, arms full of groceries and a casserole dish that she kept refilling every few days like it was her way of keeping me alive. Frank, this stoic old Navy man who always seemed to speak in short, dry one-liners, started showing up with Eli's favorite donuts. He taught him how to fly a kite on a windy Saturday in March. They've been showing up ever since. Meanwhile, my own parents, Victor and Susan, barely even acknowledged the gravity of what I was going through. My older sister Angela came over once with her twins in tow. She spent the whole hour talking about how overwhelmed she was with her husband's travel schedule and how hard it was balancing work and her yoga class. Susan nodded sympathetically the whole time. Not one word about Liam. Not one look at Eli. At first, I tried to give them the benefit of the doubt. Grief makes people weird, right? But a week passed. Then 2. No calls. No offers of help. When I finally asked Susan if she could maybe pick Eli up from school one day so I could go to a counseling appointment, she said, "Can't Angela do it? I'm taking the twins to their piano class. Angela's twins are 7 and 5. They're fine. But my son lost his father. And still, they act like Angela's kids are the ones that matter more. It's always been like that, though. Even before Liam died. Angela is the golden child, 2 degrees, always perfectly put together, Pinterest birthday parties, Instagram perfect marriage. Me? I was the one who got pregnant at 26 and married Liam without a big wedding. I work as a speech therapist at a public elementary school. Nothing glamorous. But Liam and I build a quiet life. A loving one. We didn't need fanfare. Carol and Frank, despite losing their son, refused to let me or Eli drown. They come over every Sunday now. Carol helps with laundry, and Frank installed a new swing set in our backyard. They even gave me some money from Liam's life insurance. Not because I asked, but because they said they wanted Eli to have a little more breathing room. My own parents haven't offered a dime. Not that I want their money. It's the principle. Eli keeps asking why Grandma Susan never comes to his soccer games. He asks in that innocent, soft way, like he just wants to understand. How do I explain favoritism to a child? I just tell him Grandma's busy, which she always is. Busy helping Angela, busy co-hosting church events, busy going to wine tastings with her friends from the club. Last month, Eli had a school project, a poster about family traditions. He picked Sunday dinner with Carol and Frank. When his teacher sent home a picture of his presentation board, I cried. Not because he left out my side of the family, but because that board showed the truth. The people who stepped up weren't blood. The final straw happened last weekend. Carol and Frank invited me and Eli on a trip to the mountains, just a cabin weekend to reset a bit. I posted a picture of Eli roasting marshmallows with Frank by the fire. The next day, I got a text from Angela. Didn't know we were doing family trips without inviting the rest of us. I stared at that message for a long time. Not a single word from her when Liam died. No offer to help me pack his things or sit with Eli when he cried for his dad in the middle of the night. But now she feels excluded. I replied, "You're welcome to come by any time. Eli would love to see you." She left me on read. You know what's strange? I think I stopped expecting anything from my parents the day Liam died, and Victor didn't even hug me at the funeral. He just gave me that politician's pat on the shoulder and said, "Hang in there." Like I was an intern with a stressful workload, not his daughter whose husband just died. Carol hugs me every time she sees me. Long, real hugs. She makes Eli's favorite grilled cheese with the crusts cut off. Frank listens when I talk. Doesn't try to fix anything. Just listens. People always say family is everything. But I've learned that sometimes, the people who show up for you aren't the ones who share your blood. They're the ones who show up with soup, swing sets, and quiet strength, when everything else is falling apart. Lately, I've started dreading the visits to my parents' house, and I hate that feeling. You'd think after everything, after losing Liam and raising Eli on my own, they'd soften a little. Be gentler. Maybe even supportive. But no. It's like every trip over there turns into some subtle form of punishment wrapped in concern. We were there last Sunday. Eli was in one of his talkative moods, which is most of the time, honestly. The kid is like a sponge that doesn't know when to stop soaking. He asked my dad if the old cuckoo clock in the hallway still worked and if the little bird still popped out. Then he followed it up with a whole stream of questions about how clocks worked, why it had weights, why Grandpa kept it if it didn't tick anymore. Just normal kid stuff. Curious, bright, engaged. But Victor, my father, didn't even crack a smile. He just sighed and muttered, "Eli, not so many questions, okay? You're exhausting." And he said it loud enough for everyone to hear. Eli's face changed instantly. That little wrinkle in his forehead that means he's confused, like he's trying to figure out what he did wrong. I felt my stomach twist, but I didn't say anything. I just gave Eli a gentle nudge toward the backyard and said, "Go check if the bird feeders are full, sweetheart." Meanwhile, Angela's twins sat motionless on the couch, hunched over their phones like little statues. They didn't say a single word to anyone all afternoon. Not even when we were served those overcooked ham sandwiches Susan insists are her specialty. At one point, Susan looked over at them with this soft smile and said, "Isn't it nice how well-behaved they are? So polite, just quietly sitting." I almost laughed. Quiet isn't the same as polite. It's just silent. But in that house, silence, especially from children, has always been treated like gold. Questions are noise. Curiosity is an inconvenience. And Eli? He's full of both. He came back inside carrying a pine cone he'd found under the feeder. He wanted to know why it was sticky, if it was sap, and what kind of tree it came from. My mom didn't even look up from her tablet. "Do you ever stop talking?" she said, just like that. No smile, no warmth. It hit harder than I expected. Eli blinked, looked over at me like I might translate for him, and I just squeezed his shoulder. This is what I mean when I say they don't treat us the same. Angela could show up 2 hours late to dinner with half-empty Tupperware and unbrushed hair, and they'd still fawn over her like she was the Virgin Mary. She tells them the twins are on the spectrum every time they ignore someone or zone out completely, but there's never been a diagnosis. Just a convenient excuse. Meanwhile, Eli asks why birds migrate, and he gets labeled annoying. And I swallow it. Every time. I bite my tongue and keep my face neutral. Because I've learned that showing any resentment just confirms what they already think of me. The difficult daughter. The emotional one. The one who couldn't hold her life together without clinging to Liam like a life raft. Never mind that I'm holding down a full-time job, raising a grieving child, managing a house on one income. That doesn't count. But what really gets me, what always gets me, is how fast they remember I exist when it comes to money. Last month, Victor called and asked if I could chip in for the family cruise they were planning for Christmas. Said it would mean a lot to Angela if we could all go, and that the group discount would be better with more people. This was after ignoring 3 of Eli's birthdays in a row. After telling me they couldn't help when my furnace went out last winter. But now, suddenly I'm part of the family again when it's about splitting costs. I told him I couldn't afford it. He paused and said, "Well, maybe if you stopped relying so much on Frank and Carol, you wouldn't feel so strapped." I had to walk outside so Eli wouldn't hear me cry. Carol would never say something like that. She brings groceries over unasked. Buys Eli new sneakers when his are scuffed. Once slipped me $500 and told me to spend it on something completely unnecessary. Just for me. Not because I asked. Just because she could. And never once has she made me feel like a burden. The difference is night and day. Frank and Carol treat Eli like a gift. They call him our little scientist and encourage every ridiculous question he throws at them. Last time we visited, he wanted to know how electricity worked, and Frank actually took apart a flashlight and showed him. No sighs, no dismissals, just patience. But somehow, in my parents' house, that same boy becomes a handful. A nuisance. A distraction. I've watched my father lower his newspaper like he's staring at a pest when Eli gets excited about something. I've seen my mother wave him off like he's background noise. I've heard them praise Angela's twins for being so mature, when they literally won't look up from their screens long enough to say hello. I know I should stop going. I know I should draw a line. But every time they ask, a part of me still wants to believe maybe this time will be different. Maybe they'll notice the way Eli's eyes light up when he learns something new. Maybe they'll thank me for keeping it together instead of acting like I'm barely holding on. But they don't. They never do. And I'm starting to think they never will. I don't know why I still go to these dinners. Maybe it's habit. Maybe it's guilt. Maybe a tiny, irrational part of me still believes they might surprise me one day. But this last one was the kind of evening that leaves you driving home in silence, gripping the steering wheel so hard your knuckles ache, wondering how you ever got roped into this family dynamic in the first place. It was a Saturday night, and Victor and Susan insisted we all gather for a proper family meal. Angela was there with her kids, one with headphones in, the other silently playing some game under the table like nobody could see it. Susan made one of her go-to recipes, that heavy casserole she swears is filling, though it mostly just tastes like wet bread with bits of meat and salt. I brought a salad because I knew I'd need something fresh to get through it. Everything was fine at first. Well, fine, in the sense that no one was yelling. Eli tried talking to Angela's oldest about dinosaurs and got a blank stare in response. My dad made some offhand comment about how Eli talks like a college professor, which I pretended was a compliment. But the mood shifted during dessert. I remember it clearly because I had just taken a bite of that over-baked peach cobbler Susan thinks is a family treasure when Victor leaned back in his chair, looked right at me, and asked, "So, how much did you get after Liam passed?" No build-up, no tact, just dropped it into the middle of the conversation like he was asking what I thought of the weather. For a second, I honestly thought I misheard. I looked up, fork halfway to my mouth, and said sorry. He repeated it, slower this time, like maybe I just needed time to catch up. From the insurance. What was the payout? The room went quiet. Eli was too busy arranging his peach slices into a pattern on his plate to notice, but everyone else looked directly at me. Susan, Angela, even Angela's husband, who rarely speaks when Victor's around, all watching me like I was about to open a treasure chest. I could have lied. I should have lied. But I didn't. I said the number flat out, like I was stating my height. 300,000. Victor nodded, like he was confirming something. Susan didn't blink. Angela raised her eyebrows and gave me this half smile like she was impressed, but also sizing me up. Nobody said thank you for sharing. Nobody said, that must be a complicated thing to manage with Eli and everything else. Just this heavy silence, like I'd set a stack of cash right there on the table between the salt and pepper shakers. And then Susan, in that soft, almost sweet voice she uses when she's about to ruin your day, said, "Well, I'm glad you're finally in a position to give back to the family." I didn't respond at first. I thought maybe she meant something else. But she kept going. She said things like, "Your father's been carrying the weight for so long, and it's only fair that now, since you're financially stable, you help support the people who raised you." She kept using the word support, like we were talking about something noble and gentle, not financial exploitation. Angela jumped in, like she'd been rehearsing this. She said she and her husband had already talked about it, and they were willing to commit to sending mom and dad $500 a month, which she said with this proud little nod, like it was a sacrifice worthy of sainthood. Then she looked right at me and said, "But obviously, you can do more. You have fewer expenses and you got that insurance money." That line made something in me snap a little. Fewer expenses? I'm raising a child alone. I'm paying a mortgage, car insurance, school supplies, therapy sessions, doctor's appointments, groceries that seem to get more expensive every month. Not to mention saving for Eli's future because I'm terrified of what happens if anything happens to me. But none of that matters in their math. To them, I'm the one with the pile of money sitting somewhere, untouched, just waiting for them to take their cut. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no either. I just sat there, stunned. I looked over at Eli, who had moved on from peach patterns to stacking toothpicks like tiny logs, and I thought about how Liam would have reacted to this. He would have laughed. That bitter, half-shocked kind of laugh he used to do when people showed their worst sides. I could almost hear him in my head saying, "You're not their ATM." When we got home, I couldn't sleep. I just kept hearing Susan's voice in my head. Give back to the family. Like they'd ever really given to me. Like they'd ever shown up the way Carol and Frank have. Frank never asked me for a dime, and he paid for Eli's soccer gear without blinking. Carol brought over 3 bags of groceries last week because she heard Eli had a cough and wanted to make her chicken healing soup. They lost their son, and they still pour love into me and Eli without expecting anything in return. But my own parents? They see me as a windfall, a resource, a solution to whatever quiet resentments they've been nursing about money and aging and missed vacations. I haven't responded to Angela's payment plan text yet. She followed up the next day with a little spreadsheet and a winking emoji like it was some cute sisterly thing. I didn't even open the attachment. I just sat on the porch with Eli while he drew pictures of birds and explained how beaks are shaped differently depending on what kind of seeds they eat. He's the only reason I keep going. The only reason I haven't completely cut them off. But moments like that dinner, they remind me why I keep the leash short. Because love doesn't come with a ledger. And family, real family, doesn't keep score with dollar signs. I should have trusted my gut, but I didn't. Instead, I told myself that maybe this was the beginning of something better. That maybe agreeing to the money would open a door. A gesture of goodwill. A peace offering wrapped in wire transfers. So I did it. I started sending my parents $1,000 a month. Just like Angela suggested in that smug little spreadsheet she emailed with the subject line, Family Sustainability Plan. At first, I didn't even tell anyone. Not Carol, not Frank, not my therapist. I just set up the automatic payment from my bank account and let it drain. Quietly. The first time I hit submit, I stared at the screen longer than I should have, waiting for something to feel different. Something to feel better. It didn't. It just felt like watching part of Liam's life insurance float away into a void. The agreement, though nobody actually called it that, came with unspoken terms. Support in exchange for sacrifice. We're all doing our part, Angela had said during that dinner, as if this were a team effort. So I waited for the part where they did theirs. I thought maybe Susan would call more, maybe offer to help with Eli now and then, show up to a soccer game, maybe even have dinner with us once in a while like a normal grandmother. Instead, she called once to ask if I could make the transfer on the 5th instead of the 1st next month because they were expecting a repair guy and needed a little cushion. Nothing about Eli. Not even a "how are you holding up?" Just a logistics check. A week later, I had to work late because of a last-minute IEP meeting that went long. I called Susan, asked if she could pick up Eli from aftercare. It would have taken her 15 minutes, max. She said, "Oh, honey, I would, but I've already poured a glass of wine, and I'm in my robe." And that was that. No offer to send Angela. No. Is everything okay? Just a laugh, and you'll figure it out. Frank picked him up. Of course. I called him in a panic, and he didn't even ask questions. Just said, "Give me 10 minutes. And he meant it. When I got home later, Eli was already in pajamas, sitting at the kitchen table with a bowl of Carol's chicken noodle soup and a new library book. Frank was fixing the kitchen sink, because I had mentioned offhandedly that it was dripping. The contrast between them and my own parents felt like someone holding a mirror up to all the wrong I had tried to ignore. And still, the money kept leaving my account. $1,000 every month, like clockwork. In return, I got silence and excuses. I asked Susan again 2 weeks later if she could watch Eli for an hour on a Saturday morning while I went to a grief support group. She said she'd already committed to a brunch thing with Angela and the twins. "Can't you ask Carol?" she said, like it was the most obvious solution. And the worst part? I did. I called Carol, and she said yes, without hesitation. She even baked Eli's favorite lemon squares and told me to take my time. The resentment started as a trickle, but it's a flood now. I pay them $1,000 a month for what? The privilege of being ignored? The right to be quietly tolerated at family dinners? To hear them praise Angela for every basic thing she does while I get a pat on the head and a change in subject? Susan posted a photo on Facebook last week. Her, Angela, and the twins at some fall festival. The caption was 3 generations of strength. I wasn't in the photo. Eli wasn't in the photo. But I paid for her ticket there. I paid for the damn funnel cakes they were smiling over. I paid for the sweater she was wearing. And I doubt she even thought twice about it. It's not about the money. Not really. It's about what the money represents. A quiet kind of blackmail. Pay, and maybe they'll pretend to care. Maybe they'll let you sit at the table. Maybe they won't talk about you like an obligation. Maybe, if you keep the payments coming, they'll tolerate your grief and your inconvenient child and your quiet desperation to feel like you still have a family. But it's never enough. It was never going to be enough. Every month I hit that submit button, I feel like I'm buying a seat at a table where I'm still the outsider. Every month, I remind myself that love, real love, doesn't need an invoice. And yet, here I am, sending money for silence, for avoidance, for being made to feel like my child's questions are noise, while indifference gets celebrated. I'm trying to hold on. For Eli, for the memory of what family is supposed to be. But the weight of betrayal is growing heavier than the grief that started it all. And I don't know how much longer I can keep paying to be reminded that I'm on my own. It was the week before Christmas when Susan called. I remember because I was in the middle of helping Eli wrap a present for his teacher. This messy, crooked bundle of red paper and too much tape that he was so proud of. I had glitter on my hands, and he was babbling about how he hoped she liked hot cocoa because he'd picked out a mug with snowmen on it. That's when my phone rang, and I saw her name. Her voice was light, almost cheerful, which should have been the first red flag. She asked how we were, how school was going for Eli, if I was planning to make that cute peppermint bark again this year. Then, like she was mentioning something casually, like asking if I had remembered to buy stamps, she said, "Oh, and I just wanted to let you know that this year's Christmas Eve dinner is going to be adults only." I paused, thinking I'd misunderstood. Adults only? I repeated. "Yes," she said, like it was obvious. "We thought it would be a little more relaxing that way. Less noise, you know? Just dinner, wine, some adult conversation." It didn't even sound like her voice. It was too rehearsed, like she'd been coached on how to say it. I asked slowly, "So you don't want Eli there?" She hesitated. "It's not about him specifically, honey. You know how energetic he gets. We just want to keep things calm this year. You understand." And I did. I understood perfectly. I said nothing for a second too long, then told her, fine. I'd make it work. I hung up and stared at the blinking lights on the Christmas tree while Eli asked if he could add more stickers to the card he'd made. I told him sure and excused myself to the bathroom, where I sat on the edge of the tub and tried to breathe. That night, I called Carol. I didn't even need to explain the whole thing. I just said, would you and Frank mind having Eli Christmas Eve? And she said, of course. We'd love to. We'll do a little movie night. I was going to bake gingerbread anyway. No questions. No judgment. No confusion about who Eli was or why he mattered. On Christmas Eve, I dressed nice, black dress, warm coat, makeup for the first time in weeks, and dropped Eli off with his grandparents. He didn't even seem disappointed. He was too excited about making snowman cookies and watching The Grinch. Frank gave me a reassuring nod as I left, and Carol hugged me so long I had to blink back tears before I got in the car. I drove to my parents' house in silence. No music, just the hum of the engine and the question that kept circling in my brain. Why wasn't he allowed? When I pulled up, the driveway was full. Angela's car was parked sideways on the curb, like always. There were lights in every window, and I could hear music and laughter before I even rang the doorbell. Susan opened the door with a smile that faded a little when she saw I was alone. Oh good, you made it, she said, stepping aside. The smell of ham and cinnamon hit me as I walked in. Victor was by the fireplace, holding a glass of red wine. Angela was already talking loudly from the kitchen. I handed Susan the bottle of wine I brought and was about to take off my coat when I heard it, a high-pitched laugh. A kid's laugh. Then another, running footsteps across the hardwood floor. I turned the corner and saw them. Angela's twins, sprawled out on the living room rug with a new game console. One of my cousin's boys throwing a Nerf ball across the hall. Two more children I didn't even recognize chasing each other with candy canes. All of them. Every single one. Every child but mine. I stood there for a second, trying to process it. The sound of their voices felt like static in my ears. I looked at Susan, who had followed me in and was now smoothing her apron like she hadn't just lied to me. I thought. I started, my voice thin. You said. She had the audacity to look mildly flustered. Well, it turned out that a few people couldn't find sitters. It's nothing personal. Nothing personal. I stared at her like I didn't know who she was. Victor didn't even look up. Angela waved at me from the kitchen, then turned back to whoever she was bragging to about her promotion. The kids were screaming with laughter, and I couldn't move. I felt something twist deep in my chest. It wasn't anger. Not exactly. It was betrayal. Quiet, patient, gnawing betrayal. I left my son with people who love him so I could come to a dinner where he was explicitly excluded, only to find that the rule didn't apply to anyone else. I stayed. I wish I hadn't, but I stayed. For 2 hours, I sat at the table and listened to stories that didn't include me. I drank a glass of wine that tasted like guilt and bitterness. I smiled when I was supposed to, kept my hands folded neatly in my lap, while Angela's kids ran screaming through the hallway, and nobody told them to be quiet. I didn't touch my plate. I didn't ask why. I didn't make a scene. I just sat there, feeling like a stranger in a house where I used to live, surrounded by people who looked like family but acted like creditors waiting for my next payment. At 8:17, I picked up my coat, told Susan thank you for dinner, and left. Eli was asleep on the couch when I got to Carol and Frank's. He had cookie crumbs on his cheek and a gingerbread man clutched in his little hand. Carol tucked a blanket over him and whispered, "We had such a nice night." I kissed his forehead and sat on the floor beside him, brushing his hair back from his face. I didn't tell her what happened. I didn't need to. She looked at me for a long moment and said, "You're doing right by him. Always remember that." I nodded, and for the first time that night, I let myself cry. Quietly, carefully, like a secret I couldn't afford to share. I thought I could let it go. I told myself it wasn't the time or place, that making a scene wouldn't change anything. But when I got home from that Christmas Eve dinner, sat alone on my couch with the faint smell of peppermint still clinging to my coat, and the image of all those children running around where mine wasn't even welcome, something in me cracked. I waited. I waited until Christmas Day, when everyone was gathered again at my parents' house for brunch. I showed up with Eli this time. No phone call. No permission asked. He walked in beside me, holding a plate of cookies we'd made together that morning, wearing the sweater Carol had knit for him with a red snowflake pattern and tiny wooden buttons. He looked proud. I looked tired. Victor greeted us with a nod. Susan didn't even flinch. I made it through coffee, through the eggs and the ham and the awkward small talk. I listened to Angela go on and on about her new home gym, how her boys just don't really do sugar anymore, even though I saw them stuffing chocolate truffles into their pockets the night before. I kept my face still. I kept my voice level, until I couldn't anymore. It was when Susan said, loudly and casually, It's so lovely to have well-behaved children at family gatherings. Makes everything more peaceful. I put my coffee cup down, very carefully. Then I turned to her and said, "What exactly do you mean by that?" The room went still. A cousin's kid dropped a piece of waffle and didn't even notice. Susan blinked like I'd spoken in another language. "You know what I mean, Madison. Some kids just understand how to behave around adults. Not everyone is the same." I nodded slowly. "Right. Like how you told me Eli wasn't invited to Christmas Eve because it was adults only. But then I showed up and saw every other kid in the family tearing around your house like it was a Chuck E. Cheese." Angela made a quiet noise, but I held up a hand. "No. Let me finish. You didn't forget. It wasn't a scheduling mix-up. You deliberately excluded my son. You decided he wasn't peaceful enough. That his curiosity, his voice, his energy, all of which are traits you praise in every other child, were too much for your holiday aesthetic." Susan tried to interrupt. I didn't let her. "I've kept quiet for years," I said. "I've watched you treat Angela's kids like royalty while Eli gets scolded for asking questions. I've swallowed every slight, every dismissal, every empty excuse for why you can't pick him up from school or come to one of his games or just ask how he's doing. And still, I sent you money. $1,000 a month, every month, for the past 7 months. Because you said you needed help. Because Angela said she'd do her part and send 500. I believed you." I turned then, slowly, toward Angela, who was suddenly very busy smoothing her napkin. "Tell me something. Have you sent a single cent?" She didn't look up. Her mouth opened, then closed again. Her husband, Jason, stared at her, blinking like he wasn't sure he'd heard right. "Angela," I said, sharper this time. She shrugged, barely a whisper. "We meant to. Things came up." Jason's face changed. It was subtle at first. A kind of confusion, then realization, then something harder. "You told me you were covering your share," he said, flat and low. "Every month. You said Madison was helping because she could afford more. You told me not to worry about it." Angela didn't respond. Someone coughed awkwardly near the sideboard. I heard a fork clink against a plate. Jason stood up. "We're leaving." Angela finally looked up, panicked. "Wait, can we just talk?" "No," he said. "Not here." He walked out without another word. One of their kids trailed behind, looking confused, a chocolate stain on his shirt. Susan stood frozen. Victor was staring at his lap like the tablecloth was the most fascinating thing in the world. I stood too, picked up Eli's coat and handed it to him. "Come on, buddy," I said. "We're going to Carol and Frank's." He slipped it on without question. Before I left, I looked once more at Susan and said, "You don't get to hide behind silence and politeness while you teach a child that he's less than. Not anymore." No one stopped me. No one said a word. The door clicked shut behind us like a period on a sentence I should have written years ago. By the time I pulled into Carol and Frank's driveway that afternoon, something in me had already shifted. It wasn't rage, and it wasn't sadness. It was clarity, the kind that settles in your chest like a weight finally removed, leaving behind this strange, hollow space you didn't realize had been crowded for so long. I took a deep breath, looked at Eli in the rearview mirror, already unbuckling himself, chattering about gingerbread houses, and I knew I was done. Truly done. Frank opened the door before we even knocked. He just smiled, said, "Welcome home," and took the tray of leftover cookies from my hand without asking a thing. Carol was already in the kitchen, rolling out more dough for Eli to cut into little reindeer shapes. The house smelled like cinnamon and nutmeg and peace. That night, after Eli went to bed in the guest room, still wearing his sweater, curled up with a stuffed bear he found in a box of Frank's old things, I sat alone on the couch, pulled out my phone, and opened the banking app. 7 months of automatic payments, all lined up in neat little rows like insults I kept politely disguised as generosity. I scrolled to the recurring transfer, the one labeled Family Support, and hovered for a second. Then I pressed Cancel. The confirmation message popped up immediately, and I hit Yes. It was quiet, clean. No drama, no ceremony. Just a tap, and it was gone. Like throwing off chains I had convinced myself were bracelets. I stared at the screen for a while after that, hands still resting on the phone, and felt a calm I hadn't felt in years. The next morning, I sent one message. A group text to Susan, Victor, and Angela. It said, "Effective immediately, I will no longer be sending money or participating in this family dynamic. I'm done. Do not contact me." Then I blocked all 3. I didn't wait for replies. I didn't want explanations, guilt, or apologies that would be more about saving face than fixing anything. That Christmas Day was the first one in 7 years that didn't end with a headache. We stayed in pajamas until noon. Carol made her famous honey ham. Frank helped Eli build a cardboard sleigh. And when Eli asked if we could leave cookies for Second Santa, Frank winked and said, Only if we leave one for his reindeer too. We played board games, took goofy pictures by the fire, and watched Eli fall asleep on the couch mid-sentence. There was no yelling, no quiet tension, no side eyes or fake smiles. Just comfort, just love, just real family. 3 days later, my cousin Rachel called. We hadn't spoken much in recent years, but she'd always been the one person at family events who asked how I really was, not just out of politeness. She said she didn't want to get in the middle of anything, but after I left that day, most of the guests did too. Some quietly, some not so quietly. Apparently, Susan tried to pretend like nothing had happened, but people weren't buying it anymore. Rachel said Victor spent most of the evening in the garage. Angela tried to do damage control, but it backfired when Jason didn't come back inside. Several relatives, even ones I hadn't expected, were openly talking about how messed up the whole situation was. One uncle apparently said, if Madison's kid wasn't good enough for them, neither are mine, and took his family home early. Rachel told me, you were right to say something. Everyone felt it. You just finally said it out loud. I thanked her, then hung up and sat for a long time by the window. Outside, Eli and Frank were trying to build a snow fort, even though the snow was too powdery. Carol brought them out hot chocolate, laughing as Frank tried to shape a wall with a Tupperware lid. I watched them through the frost-glazed glass and felt that hollow space in my chest fill with something warmer. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But something like peace. Something like the beginning of a life I didn't have to beg to be included in. A life where my son would never again stand outside a door he wasn't allowed to walk through. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel broken. I felt free. New Year's Eve started like any other cold, quiet evening in our little house. Carol had made this massive pot of chili that simmered on the stove all afternoon, and Eli was bouncing around the living room in his socks, rearranging the stuffed animals on the couch so they could watch the countdown too. Frank was outside setting up a couple of sparkler sticks and cheap poppers he'd picked up from a roadside stand. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt right. Warm. Safe. Then the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Carol and Frank were already inside. It was dark out, nearly 7, and the wind had picked up. I opened the door, and there they were. Victor and Susan, standing on the porch in matching wool coats, a large silver gift bag between them. Susan gave me a smile that looked a little too rehearsed, and Victor cleared his throat like he was about to deliver a speech. We just wanted to stop by, Susan said. We brought something for Eli. I looked down at the bag. The corner of a box poked out, one of those expensive VR headset things. The kind that costs more than my monthly grocery budget. Eli would have gone nuts over it. But I didn't reach for it. I didn't even step aside. You're not coming in, I said. Victor blinked. We just want to talk. You had a year to talk, I said. You had years. And when I finally did, you lied. You humiliated me. You left my son standing outside a door his own family told him not to walk through. Susan's voice got smaller. We're sorry, Madison. No, you're not, I said. You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you got caught. She opened her mouth again, but I was done. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just stepped back and closed the door, slowly and calmly, while Victor stood there holding a gift he probably thought would fix everything. They knocked again, then left. I walked straight to the kitchen, picked up my phone, and blocked their numbers. I went into the group thread with Angela and did the same. I deleted the thread, cleared my call history, and that was it. No more fake apologies. No more polite silence. No more monthly payments sent in the name of some imagined peace. I was done paying for their love. And I meant it this time. That night, after Eli was in bed, I transferred the last 7 months of payments, the amount I'd been sending them, into his education fund. I opened a new savings folder labeled Eli's Future and dropped every cent in. Watching that number rise felt like planting a flag, like saying, this is where it goes now, towards something that matters, towards someone who matters. Since then, everything's felt lighter. Carol and Frank have been with us nearly every weekend. They show up with pancakes, puzzles, books about space, things that matter to Eli. Liam's cousins started reaching out more too. Not in that check-in on the widow kind of way, but real connection. They invite us to birthdays, backyard movie nights, silly weekend projects. Eli's the first kid they ask for when we walk through the door. Where's our scientist? They say, crouching down to hear his latest theory about moon craters or volcanoes or why cats always seem to know when someone's allergic. He's blossoming. I don't know how else to put it. He's himself again, or maybe more himself than ever. Loud and curious and wild-haired and loved. Genuinely loved. Not tolerated. Not reshaped to fit someone's idea of what a good boy should sound like. And me? I'm okay. Not all the time, not every minute, but enough. Enough to laugh without guilt. Enough to make plans. Enough to say no, finally, and not feel like I'm the one breaking something. I didn't lose a family. I stopped pretending one existed. So that's it. That's the whole thing.